You have probably heard the parable of the 10 virgins. If you grew up anywhere near a church, it is one of those classic Sunday school stories. 10 bridesmaids waiting for a wedding. 5 are smart and bring extra oil for their lamps. 5 are foolish and forget. The groom shows up late. The foolish ones run out of oil. And while they are gone trying to buy more, the doors get locked. The end. Moral of the story. Always be prepared. Right? Well, no. That is the sanitized colouring book version of Matthew 25. The truth is, there is a core detail buried deep in first century Jewish culture that completely changes everything about this story. Once you understand what Jesus was actually saying to his audience, the message stops being a simple lesson about planning ahead and becomes one of the most urgent, terrifying, and deeply personal warnings in the entire Bible. What nobody told you about Matthew 25 is that it is not about religious duty. It is about an ancient, high-stakes waiting game where missing the cue meant losing everything. To really grasp the weight of this parable, we have to completely erase our modern ideas of what a wedding looks like. Today, if you are invited to a wedding, you get a beautiful card in the mail months in advance. It tells you the exact date, the exact venue, and exactly what time you need to be in your seat. You set an alarm, you show up, you watch the ceremony, you eat some cake, and you go home. A first century Middle Eastern wedding was absolutely nothing like that. There were no save the dates. There were no precise timelines. In fact, the entire process was built around anticipation, mystery, and sudden explosive celebration. In ancient Jewish culture, a marriage happened in 2 distinct stages. The first stage was the betrothal. This was not like a modern engagement where you just wear a ring and can break it off if things do not work out. A betrothal was a legally binding covenant. You were considered legally married, but you did not live together yet, and the marriage was not consummated. Instead, after the betrothal ceremony, the groom would leave his bride and return to his father's house. Why? Because he had a massive job to do. He had to build the bridal chamber. He had to construct an entirely new addition to his family's home, where he and his new wife would live. And here is the catch. The groom did not get to decide when the room was finished. He could not just slap some mud and wood together and call it a day. Only his father had the authority to inspect the new room and give the final approval. If people asked the groom, "When is the big day?" his literal answer would be, "I do not know, only my father knows." Sound familiar? It should. So what was the bride doing during all of this? She was waiting. For months, sometimes up to a year, she and her bridesmaids had to be completely ready to leave at a moment's notice. They had their dresses ready. They had their belongings packed. And because the groom almost always came at night to maximise the surprise and the spectacle, they had to have their lamps ready. Imagine the psychological toll of that wait. Every single night as the sun goes down, you have to wonder, is it tonight? When you go to sleep, you sleep with one ear open. Because when the groom finally got the green light from his father, he did not send a runner ahead to give a 2-hour warning. He and his groomsmen would march through the dark streets of the village, and the only warning the bride and her bridal party would get was the sudden piercing blast of a shofar horn and a massive shout in the middle of the night. "The bridegroom's coming! Come out to meet him!" There was no time to get ready once the shout happened. You were either ready or you were left behind in the dark. That is the world Jesus is speaking into. A world where preparation is not a last-minute scramble, but a lifestyle. When we look at the 5 foolish virgins, it is easy to judge them. But put yourself in their shoes. Days turn into weeks. Weeks turn into months. The initial excitement fades into the mundane routine of everyday life. You start thinking you have plenty of time. You start cutting corners. The urgency simply evaporates. That is exactly the trap they fell into. They thought they could manage the timeline. They thought they could wait until the very last possible second to get their affairs in order. But in a first century Jewish wedding, the midnight shout waits for no one. The moment that horn blows, the time for preparation is over, and the time for revealing who you truly are has begun. let us talk about the single most misunderstood element in this entire story: the oil. If you look closely at the text, the 10 virgins are actually identical in almost every single way. They all received the exact same invitation. They all wore the right clothes. They all showed up to the right place. They all had lamps. They all waited. And spoiler alert for the next section, they all fell asleep. From the outside, looking at this bridal party, you could not tell the difference between the wise and the foolish. They looked exactly the same. The only thing that separated them, the only thing that determined their eternal destiny, was something invisible to the naked eye until the very last second: the oil in their flasks. So what is the oil? For centuries, scholars and preachers have debated this. Some say that oil represents the Holy Spirit. Others say it represents good works or faith or grace. And while those are all theologically connected, if we want to get to the absolute heart of what Jesus is saying, we have to look deeper. In the Bible, the lamp often represents the outward profession of faith. It is your religious activity. It is showing up to church, knowing the worship songs, carrying a Bible, and knowing how to speak the Christian lingo. Anyone can carry a lamp. It is incredibly easy to look the part. But the lamp is completely useless without the oil. The oil is the internal, hidden reality that fuels the outward expression. The oil represents a deep, personal, intimate relationship with God. It is the history you have built with Him in the secret place. It is the character forged in the fires of trial when no one else was watching. It is the quiet moments of surrender, the tears shed in private prayer, the times you chose to trust Him when everything around you was falling apart. That is the oil. It is the undeniable, deeply rooted knowing of who God is, not just knowing facts about Him. The foolish virgins had the outward appearance of being ready for the wedding, but they lacked the inner substance required to sustain the fire when the waiting got long and the night got dark. They had the religion, but they absolutely did not have the relationship. Now, this brings us to one of the most controversial and uncomfortable moments in the parable. The midnight cry happens. The foolish virgins wake up, look down at their lamps, and panic. The flame is dying, the wick is smouldering. The outward facade is crumbling because there is no internal substance left to sustain it. In a desperate panic, they turn to the 5 wise virgins and make a seemingly reasonable request. Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out. And the wise virgins look them dead in the eye and say, "No." Wait, what? Aren't Christians supposed to be generous? Aren't we supposed to share what we have with those in need? If you read this through a modern lens, the wise virgins look incredibly selfish, hoarding their resources while their friends are in a literal crisis. It seems totally out of character for the teachings of Jesus. But when you understand what the oil actually represents, their answer is not selfish at all. It is just a brutal, undeniable fact of reality. You cannot borrow someone else's relationship with God. The wise virgins were not being mean. They were stating a spiritual impossibility. Intimacy with the creator of the universe is not a transferable commodity. I cannot pour my history with God into your heart. I cannot transfer the character I have developed over years of obedience into your life in a split second. If you have spent your entire life neglecting your inner world, you cannot suddenly tap into my spiritual reserves when a crisis hits. Think about it like this. Imagine you are about to take the most difficult, high-stakes final exam of your life. You spent the entire semester goofing off, skipping classes, and playing video games. The person sitting next to you studied every single night for months. The professor hands out the test. You look at the first question, and your mind goes completely blank. You lean over to your friend and whisper, "Hey, can I have some of your knowledge? Can you just transfer your understanding of this subject into my brain right now?" They cannot do it, even if they wanted to, even if they loved you with all their heart. They cannot give you the hours of study they put in. You cannot borrow their preparation. That is exactly what is happening here. The foolish virgins are trying to ride the coattails of someone else's faith. And this is a massive warning for us today. Far too many people are trying to live off borrowed oil. You are trying to survive off your parents' faith. You are relying on the prayers of your grandmother. You think that because your spouse is deeply devoted to God, or because you listen to your favourite pastor's podcast every week, that somehow their intimacy with God will cover your lack of it. It will not. When the darkness falls, their oil will only light their way. Your lamp will go out. This is why the wise virgins tell the foolish ones, "Go rather to those who sell and buy for yourselves." Again, Jesus is not talking about a literal transaction with money. He is using marketplace language to emphasize that the oil actually costs something. Building a deep, resilient relationship with God is not free. It costs your time, it costs your pride, it costs your superficiality, it costs your own will and desires. You have to pay the price of spending time in His presence, reading His word, and yielding your heart to Him. You cannot get it at the last minute. You cannot pull up to a spiritual drive-through and order a combo meal of deep faith and unshakable character. It is cultivated drop by drop, day by day, year by year. The foolish virgins wanted the reward of the wedding banquet without paying the daily price of preparation. And when the groom finally arrived, their lack of investment was violently exposed. There is a detail in this story that is incredibly easy to read right past, but it holds one of the most profound truths of the entire parable. In Matthew 25, verse 5, it says, "As the bridegroom was delayed, they all became drowsy and slept." Did you catch that? They all slept. Not just the foolish virgins, the wise ones fell asleep too. For a long time, people have used this verse to criticize the bridal party, acting as if falling asleep was the great failure of the story. But that is simply not true. Sleeping is not the sin here. Fatigue is not a moral failure. Jesus is painting a very realistic picture of the human experience. The bridegroom was delayed. The wait was long. The night was dark. Getting tired is a natural, inevitable part of living in the tension of the waiting period. Whether this represents the long, agonizing stretch of human history as we wait for the return of Christ, or simply the span of your own individual life from day to day, the reality is that life is exhausting. You have to go to work, you have to raise your kids, you have to pay your bills, and yes, you have to sleep. God does not expect you to live in a state of hyper-anxious, sleepless paranoia, staring out the window 24 hours a day. The core issue is not the fact that their eyes were closed. The defining difference between the two groups was the state of their preparation before their eyes ever closed. The wise virgins could fall asleep in absolute peace because their work was already finished. They had the extra oil. They had put in the time. Their readiness was secured, so their rest was justified. The foolish virgins, on the other hand, went to sleep in a state of profound negligence. They confused the bridegroom's delay with a cancellation. They assumed that because he had not shown up yet, they still had plenty of time to figure things out later. They allowed the quiet routine of the delay to lull them into a false sense of security, mistaking the silence of the night for an excuse to be lazy. And then the silence shatters. But at midnight there was a cry, "Here is the bridegroom, come out to meet him." Midnight. In literature and in scripture, midnight is always the hour of the unexpected. It is the darkest, most vulnerable point of the night. It is the moment when you are least prepared for a sudden interruption. The shout rings out and absolute chaos erupts. All 10 women jolt awake. The adrenaline hits. They instinctively reach for their lamps to trim the wicks and get the flames burning bright to light the path for the procession. For the wise virgins, the flame catches, the oil burns, and the light is steady. But for the foolish virgins, the reality of their negligence suddenly comes crashing down. They light the wicks, but the flame immediately begins to sputter, choke, and die. Why? Because a wick cannot burn on its own for very long. Without the deep reservoir of oil to draw from, the dry wick simply consumes itself and turns to ash. This is exactly what happens when the pressure of life, or the finality of eternity, suddenly hits a person who has a superficial, outward religion but no deep, internal relationship with God. When the crisis hits, when the midnight shout happens, you cannot fake the flame anymore. The pressure does not create the reality of your spiritual condition, it simply exposes it. In a state of sheer panic, the foolish virgins drop everything and run out into the pitch-black streets, desperately trying to find a merchant awake at midnight, desperately trying to buy the oil they should have secured months ago. It is a tragic, frantic scramble to do in 5 minutes what was supposed to take a lifetime. While they are out frantically searching in the dark, the bridegroom arrives. The procession heads into the banquet hall. The wise virgins, with their lamps burning brightly, go in with him to the wedding feast. And then the text delivers one of the most chilling sentences in the entire Bible. And the door was shut. To understand the absolute terror of this moment, you have to understand first century Middle Eastern hospitality. In that culture, shutting a door on a guest, especially during a massive multi-day community celebration like a wedding, was practically unthinkable. The doors to a wedding banquet were meant to be wide open. It was an event for the entire village. So, for the master of the house to deliberately shut and lock the door meant that the time for grace, the time for entry, and the time for celebration had come to a hard, irreversible end. The period of invitation was officially over. The period of judgment had begun. Eventually, the foolish virgins come running back. They stand outside the heavy, locked wooden door, pounding their fists against it in the dark. "Lord, Lord, open to us," they beg. You can hear the desperation, the regret, the sheer terror in their voices. They thought they were part of the wedding party. They wore the dresses. They carried the lamps. They waited all those months. They just missed the final, crucial detail. From the other side of the door, the bridegroom answers. He does not say, "I am sorry you missed the procession." He does not say, "You did not have enough oil." He speaks a sentence that should shake every single one of us to our core. He says, "Truly, I say to you, I do not know you." Notice what he is saying. I do not know you. This absolutely confirms what we talked about with the oil. The oil was never just about good deeds or religious checklists. It was always about relationship. The bridegroom does not reject them because of a technicality with their lighting equipment. He rejects them because there is no intimacy. There is no recognition. They spent their whole lives hanging around the edges of the wedding preparations, but they never actually got to know the groom. And when the door finally shuts, all the outward appearances in the world cannot save you if the creator of the universe looks at your heart and says, "We are strangers." So what does an ancient Middle Eastern wedding have to do with you, right now, sitting here watching this video? Absolutely everything, because you and I, right in this very moment, are living in the delay. We are the bridal party sitting in the dark, waiting for the groom. And the single most important question you have to ask yourself today is not what church you go to, or what theological labels you use, or how good you look to the people around you. The only question that matters is what is inside your flask. Let us get incredibly practical about this. What does it look like to carry a lamp with absolutely no oil in the modern world? It looks like having a Christian bumper sticker on your car, but acting with ruthless selfishness toward everyone you meet. It looks like posting aesthetic Bible verses on social media for the likes, but never actually opening the book to hear God's voice in the quiet of your own room. It looks like knowing every single lyric to the latest worship songs, raising your hands in a crowded building on Sunday morning, but having absolutely zero private prayer life by Tuesday afternoon. The lamp is your reputation. It is your religious resume. The oil is your reality. It has never been easier to construct a religious facade than it is today. You can build an entire identity around looking like a devoted follower of Jesus. You can fool your friends. You can fool your family. You can fool your pastor. If you try hard enough, you might even fool yourself for a little while. But you cannot fool the midnight cry. When the pressure of life hits, the truth of your preparation is instantly exposed. When the terrifying medical diagnosis comes, when the job is suddenly lost, when a relationship shatters, or when a massive global crisis flips the world upside down, your lamp is going to be tested. If your faith is built entirely on the emotional high of a Sunday service, the borrowed enthusiasm of a YouTube video, or the spiritual discipline of your parents, your flame is going to sputter, choke, and die the second the wind blows. A hollow religion cannot survive the dark. You desperately need your own oil. You need a faith that holds up behind closed doors, a relationship with the Creator that is anchored in truth, not in trends. The most dangerous, seductive lie you can possibly believe right now is that you always have tomorrow. It is the whisper that says, I will get serious about my faith later. I will start spending time with God when my schedule clears up. I will deal with my hidden sins and my compromises when I am a little bit older. That is exactly the deception the 5 foolish virgins fell for. They confuse God's patience with God's permission to be lazy. But the story makes one thing brutally clear. The door of grace does not stay open forever. Eventually, the waiting period ends. The midnight shout is going to echo for every single one of us, either through the triumphant return of Christ or through the sudden, unexpected end of our own fleeting lives on this earth. And when that moment comes, there is no hitting the snooze button. There is no cramming for the final exam. There is no running out to the marketplace to quickly buy the intimacy and character you refuse to cultivate over a lifetime. Do not let your life end with a locked door and the terrifying words, I do not know you. You still have time right now. The bridegroom is still delaying. The marketplace is still open. But you have to be willing to pay the price. You have to trade your pride for humility. You have to trade your superficial distractions for deep, quiet moments in the presence of God. You have to stop playing church and start pursuing Jesus. Look down at your lamp today. Are you just carrying around an empty shell to look the part? Or are you filled with the oil of a genuine, unbreakable relationship with God? Do not wait for the midnight cry to find out. Trim your wick, fill your flask, and stay awake. The bridegroom is coming.